Look, you wake up early every single day. You go to work, you deal with stress, deadlines, maybe even a boss you don't like. At the end of the month, you get paid, and for a moment it feels good. But then reality kicks in. Bills, rent, food, subscriptions you barely remember signing up for, and suddenly, that money disappears faster than you expected. Here's the thing. You're not lazy. You're not careless. In fact, you're probably doing what everyone told you to do. Work hard, save money, be responsible. And yet, you look at your bank account, and it doesn't reflect the effort you've been putting in. Now, you might be thinking, maybe I just need a higher salary, or maybe I need to save more. But what if that's not the real problem? What if the system you're following was never designed to make you financially free in the first place? Because once you start looking at the numbers, you'll realize something uncomfortable. Most people aren't just struggling temporarily. They're stuck. My name is Demas, and I spend way too much time thinking about money. If you're someone who feels stuck financially, make sure to hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if this helps you out. Now, I want to be very clear about something. This video is not here to shame you. It's not here to tell you that you're bad with money, because chances are you're actually trying. You're saving when you can. You're being more careful than you were a few years ago. You're thinking about your future, and that already puts you ahead of a lot of people. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Trying harder doesn't always lead to better results. Look, most people don't have a discipline problem. They have a strategy problem. They're following advice that sounds good on the surface, but doesn't actually move the needle in a meaningful way. And over time, that gap between effort and results becomes frustrating. You start questioning yourself. You start wondering if you're just bad with money. But what if you're not? What if the real issue is that you've never been shown how the game actually works? Because once you see it clearly, everything starts to change. Let's talk about the reality most people avoid. Here's what most people don't realize. When you look at actual data, not social media, not highlight reels, the financial situation of the average 30-year-old is not great. According to reports from institutions like the Federal Reserve, the median savings for people in their late 20s to early 30s is often under $5,000. That's barely enough to cover a few months of expenses. The median net worth? Somewhere around $35,000 to $50,000. And that number includes everything: savings, investments, even assets. Now subtract debt, student loans, credit cards, car payments, and suddenly, that number doesn't look nearly as strong as it sounds. This is where it gets really interesting, because these aren't people who are doing nothing. These are people who went to school, got jobs, tried to be responsible. And still, after nearly a decade of working life, they're financially fragile. Now you might be thinking, okay, but I'm not average. Maybe. But the question is, are you actually ahead or just slightly less behind? Because once you understand how low the baseline really is, you start to realize something important. The system most people follow doesn't lead to financial freedom. It leads to survival. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so the average person is struggling, but that's because they don't make enough money. And look, that sounds logical. More income should solve the problem, right? But here's the thing. There are people earning $60,000 a year who feel stuck. There are people earning $100,000 a year who feel stuck. Even people making multiple six figures and still feel like they're not getting ahead. So what's going on? Here's what most people don't realize. Income doesn't automatically create wealth. It just creates opportunity. And if that opportunity isn't used correctly, it disappears fast. This is where it gets really interesting, because as income goes up, lifestyle tends to go up with it. You move to a better place. You upgrade your car. You spend a little more on convenience. And none of these decisions feel wrong. In fact, they feel deserved. You worked for it. But over time, these small upgrades stack. And before you know it, your expenses grow just as fast, or even faster, than your income. So even though you're earning more, you're not actually keeping more. This is what people call the income illusion. From the outside, it looks like progress. But on the inside, nothing really changes. And that's why so many people feel stuck, even when they're making more money than they ever have before. So naturally, when people start feeling stuck, they look for advice. And most of the time, they hear the same things over and over again. Just save more money. Start investing early. Avoid debt at all costs. And look, none of this is wrong. In fact, it's good advice. But here's the thing. Good advice doesn't always mean complete advice, because it ignores one critical question. How much is enough? Let's take saving money. You cut your expenses. You become more disciplined. You manage to save $300, maybe $500 a month. That feels like progress. And it is. But here's what most people don't realize. At that rate, you're moving forward, just very, very slowly. Now let's talk about investing. People say, just invest in the market and let compound interest do the work. Sounds simple. But compound interest only becomes powerful when the numbers are big enough. And for most people, they're not. So they end up doing the right things, but not seeing meaningful results. And that's where frustration builds. Because from their perspective, they followed the rules, but the outcome doesn't match the effort. So the real problem isn't that the advice is wrong. It's that it's incomplete. It tells you what to do, but not how to make it actually work. So let's slow this down and actually look at the numbers, because this is where things start to click. Let's say you're doing what most people recommend. You invest $500 every month. You stay consistent. You don't try to time the market, and you get a solid average return of around 8% per year. Sounds responsible, right? After 10 years, you end up with roughly $90,000. Now look, that's not bad. That's discipline. That's consistency. But here's the uncomfortable part. That number doesn't radically change your life. It helps. It gives you some breathing room. But it's not financial freedom. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Let's change just one variable. Instead of investing $500 a month, you invest $2,500 a month. Same time frame, same 8% return. After 10 years, you're looking at around $270,000. Same person, same market. The only difference is contribution. And suddenly, the outcome looks completely different. Here's the thing. Most people obsess over returns. They worry about picking the right stock, the right timing, the perfect strategy. But in the early stages, that's not what moves the needle. Contribution does. Your ability to consistently put in more money is far more powerful than trying to outsmart the market. And once you understand that, your focus shifts. From guessing to building real momentum. Now, if the math is this clear, why don't more people actually follow through? This is where it gets really interesting. Because the biggest obstacle isn't knowledge, it's behavior. Let's start with loss aversion. Here's the thing. People feel the pain of losing money twice as strongly as the pleasure of gaining it. So what happens? They hesitate. They delay investing. They keep their money in safe places. They wait for the perfect time. And that perfect time never comes. Now add instant gratification on top of that. You work hard all week. You deal with pressure, stress, responsibilities. So when money finally comes in, your brain wants a reward. Something immediate. A new gadget. Better food. A quick upgrade in lifestyle. And again, none of this feels irrational. It feels earned. But over time, these small decisions start stacking against you, which leads to the third trap, lifestyle inflation. Every time your income increases, your expenses quietly follow. A slightly better apartment, a slightly nicer car, more convenience. And before you realize it, you've locked yourself into a higher cost of living. So even though you're making more, you're not actually moving forward. You're just running faster, on the same treadmill. And that's the trap. Not because people are careless, but because their psychology is working against their long-term goals. Now let's talk about one of the biggest questions people struggle with. Should I invest or should I pay off my debt first? Because this is where a lot of people get stuck. They overthink it. They go back and forth. And in the end, they do nothing. Here's the thing. Not all debt is the same. If you're dealing with high-interest debt, like credit cards at 18% or 20%, there's no debate. Pay it off. That's a guaranteed return, and it's one of the best investments you can make. But what about lower-interest debt? Student loans at 4-6%, car loans around 3-5%. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Mathematically, investing in the market with an average return of 7 to 8% can outperform that debt over time. But here's what most people don't realize. Money decisions aren't purely mathematical. They're emotional. Debt creates pressure. It sits in the back of your mind. It affects how you think, how you spend, even how you take risks. So the real answer isn't just numbers. It's balance. Handle high-interest debt aggressively. Make steady progress on medium-interest debt. And still invest consistently in the background. But zooming out, there's a bigger insight here. Wealthy people don't obsess over this question forever because they focus on something else entirely. Owning assets. Assets that grow. Assets that generate income. Assets that work even when they don't. Because at the end of the day, income pays your bills. But assets build your freedom. So where does this leave you? Because at this point, you understand the reality, you understand the math, and you understand the psychology. Now it comes down to action. Here's the thing. You don't need a perfect plan. You need a clear direction. Start with this. First, get honest about your numbers. Know exactly how much you earn, how much you spend, and where your money is going every single month. No guessing, no assumptions. Second, eliminate high-interest debt as fast as possible. Anything above 10% is working against you every single day. Treat it like a priority. Third, focus on increasing your income. This is the lever most people ignore. Ask for a raise. Learn a new skill. Find ways to earn even an extra $500 to $1,000 a month. Because as you saw earlier, that one change can completely shift your financial trajectory. Fourth, invest consistently. Not when you feel like it. Not when the market looks good, but every single month, automatically. And finally, be very careful with lifestyle upgrades. Just because you can spend more doesn't mean you should. Look, you're not behind because you're incapable. You're behind because no one showed you how this actually works. But now you know. And once you know, you have a choice. Stay in the same cycle or start making decisions that actually move you forward. Because the truth is simple. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to be intentional, consistently. And if you do that, a few years from now, your life can look completely different. It all starts with what you do next.